real crisis that hit American agriculture occurred in 32 and 33, which were extraordinarily arid times in American agriculture, and they would have been difficult under any circumstances, but, you know, given the fact that we were in the heart of a depression, you know, it sort of gave them double whammy. The federal government, as they were doing in all sectors, was attempting to devise policies to sort of bring them up out of the pit. This was the first time where you saw sort of the central economy trying to come together to say, for the good of everybody, you know, we've got to have an overseer over this whole system because the free market just simply isn't working.
Now as then, setting domestic policy is one of the chief ways the government solves the nation's problems.
Does a gentleman from Alabama seek recognition?
The policy-making process begins with setting and building support for a particular agenda.
Congress is the driving force in producing legislation. Government agencies implement legislation, and that's the role of the Department of Agriculture. Whenever there is a farm bill, the USDA produces a set of proposals for Congress to consider well before the farm bill has to be enacted. The President makes the Secretary of Agriculture the point person, the key negotiator. Other agencies participate in the process in the development of positions, but they don't act as the negotiators or the point people in dealing with Congress. And so the Office of Management and Budget gets involved, along with the Congressional Budget Office, to ensure that the budget guidelines are being met and to agree and come to some consensus on the costs of the different provisions of the Farm Bill.
Once an agenda has been determined, the process continues through policy formulation, implementation, and evaluation.
Sometimes we have a lot of influence with Congress in Farm Bill debates. Sometimes we don't. Nevertheless, we do participate in the process all the way, testifying at hearings as the Farm Bill works its way up, participating in markups from the subcommittee to the committee level, and also providing technical support to the congressional staff as they construct the provisions of the Farm Bill.
Domestic policies touch virtually every aspect of our lives, from the price we pay for tomatoes to safety features on the cars we drive. As policies become outdated or obsolete, they're revised or replaced by new policies that more closely reflect the nation's political pulse.
I was born into a dairy farming family. My parents were dairy farmers. My ancestors that came over from Europe, from the Prague, Czechoslovakia area, were dairy farmers, as were my husbands. So I've been a dairy farmer all my life and probably always will be.
This is better than a Century Farm. I think it was Century Farm about 25, 30 years ago, something like that. My grandfather had it. And my dad had it, and I've got it now, and now it's passing to the son.
In the 1930s, when federal farm policies were first implemented, 25% of all Americans lived on farms. Today, only 2% are farmers.
Well, my wife and I own a farm in central Indiana. It's a great corn country. It's a farm that was originally purchased by my grandfather in the 1920s. You know, it's a productive farm that is self-supporting. Freedom to Farm has impacted that operation greatly because it's given us a lot more flexibility in terms of what we plant on that land.
After more than half a century of government quotas and controls, United States farmers themselves can now decide what to grow, thanks to a major overhaul in domestic farm policy. The Freedom to Farm Act of 1996 was designed to move United States agriculture from government dependence toward a free market approach. Proponents and opponents alike agree it will radically change the economic landscape for the country's farm families.
One of the main concerns of the Farm Bill has been that the payments producers receive are what is referred to as decoupled. They are independent of what the producer actually produces. They're independent of the market price.
And that was a 180-degree change from the traditional program where the traditional farm policy, which dates back to the 1930s, says that if you receive government payments, in exchange for receiving those government payments, you have to agree to the guidelines the federal government lays down in terms of what you can plant.
Now, because the payment is a fixed lump sum, they can grow anything they want and they still get the same payment.
If weather conditions are poor in the early part of the spring and we're not able to get the corn planted in a timely basis, we're not hurt as badly because we can switch and plant soybeans, which are a more early maturing crop, require less time to grow, and still have a good bumper crop of soybeans. Whereas under the old system, we would have still had to have planted corn, even out there, clear into June, even knowing that the chances of that crop surviving a frost the fall were pretty grim.
The Freedom to Farm Act represents the first major overhaul in domestic farm policy in more than 60 years.
I think there are a lot of factors, a lot of complex factors that explain why we got a Farm Bill in 1996 that made such a substantial change in farm policy. First and foremost is a philosophy in the United States that industries should stand on their own 2 feet. Deficit reduction, I think, was also an important force as to why we reduced the role of government in agriculture.
Well, the Senate Agriculture Committee played a very dramatic role in shaping the Freedom to Farm Act, because Chairman Richard Lugar of Indiana was a strong proponent of reforming farm policies. He was a strong proponent of bringing the cost of these programs down. He was also a strong proponent for sort of unleashing American agriculture, if you will, to compete in international markets around the world.
In the past, the nation's farm policy provided a safety net for farmers through a program of government subsidies that fluctuated with market prices. If prices fell, subsidies increased. Now that safety net has been removed. In place of subsidies, farmers received guaranteed annual payments that will be completely phased out within a decade.
A lot of people have more or less damned the farmers for getting the subsidy. Well, you're subsidizing cheap food is what it amounts to. And it kept a couple of farmers in business a while longer. But the way they're dropping by the wayside now, I don't know what's going to happen.
Freedom to Farm is basically pulling the government out of agriculture. I have mixed feelings about this because in the past we have had a safety net. With the dairy industry, we have always had price supports. And with the Freedom to Farm Act now, we will be losing those price supports. We're also worried about imports, exports. 43% of the egg exports in the United States are being exported to Asia. What is going to happen if the Asian market collapses and they cannot afford to purchase our exports? What is that going to do to the American farmer?
In the past few decades, reduced farm subsidies, declining prices, and higher interest rates have put an estimated 700,000 small to mid-sized farms out of business.
I think Freedom to Farm will maybe benefit the larger farmer. It's not going to benefit us smaller farmers because we are in a position where we don't have the financial assets to expand, and a lot of us don't want to expand. We have to be market savvy, and I don't think a lot of farmers are qualified to do this right now.
The Freedom to Farm legislation is exciting from an economic perspective. Certainly the removal of the acreage reduction programs gives farmers the potential to produce more output. On the other hand, the removal of the price subsidies will make farmers react or respond to market signals to a greater degree than they have in the past. There'll be more need to use our tools for risk management under Freedom to Farm than there was under the old policies. I think overall, though, the changes in policies will make the U.S. more competitive internationally.
Since its passage, the new Farm Bill has had a significant impact on United States production.
And in the first 2 years of the Act, it has performed very well for producers. Their incomes under the Act have been higher than they would have been under the old farm policy.
The first real economic downturn in American agriculture will be the test for freedom to farm. And that economic downturn will occur. I'm a firm believer in the cycles of American agriculture, and we happen to be on one of the sort of the higher end of the cycles, if you will, right now. We will hit a lower end of that cycle at some point.
We have 4 years left before freedom of farm kicks into full effect. I told my husband, I said, well, we better get the farm paid off because we don't know what's going to happen. It's going to be survival of the fittest.
Representing American Airlines 9,300 pilots met with management in Washington today.
Pilots haven't walked out yet, but a possible strike is only 1 day away now.
Both sides show no signs of backing down.
Late today, American Airlines canceled its Friday night overseas flights.
According to government figures, a strike could strand as many as 40,000 people.
Both sides indicate it could be a very long night.
When pilots at American Airlines threatened to walk off the job over contract disputes, the fate of millions of travelers was up in the air. 11th-hour negotiations between the pilots' union and company management failed to produce an agreement, and strike leaders moved to shut down the airline. That's when the federal government stepped in.
We just got the word the president has ordered the cooling off period. The airline is operating, and we're delighted that it's operating.
By invoking a 70-year-old statute called the Railway Labor Act that allows the government to intervene when a strike threatens interstate commerce, President Bill Clinton effectively blocked the strike.
It is possible for the government to force a deal on airline management and labor. Airline unions rarely defy a presidential solution.
There's very specific laws on the books that dictate, in fact, under what circumstances the government, in this case the executive branch, can or cannot get involved in such strikes. The airlines actually fall under the Railway Act, and which does permit presidential intervention in terms of interstate commerce.
Presidential intervention in a labor dispute is rare. Labor management relations for most industries are overseen at the federal level by a 5-member independent board.
The National Labor Relations Board is a federal agency that was created by Congress in 1935 to administer the National Labor Relations Act. The National Labor Relations Act is the primary federal statute governing labor management relations in the private sector.
250,000 economic warriors forming the greatest peacetime demonstration in American history.
It was one of the highlights of the New Deal. It was enacted in response to a great wave of organizing by working people who, in response to the economic conditions in the Great Depression, were seeking to come together and organize and form unions to bargain collectively with their employers. Prior to the passage of the National Labor Relations Act, workers did not have any established rights to belong to unions. Under our statute, we do not regulate the actual terms and conditions of employment. We sort of set the ground rules. We set the rules for what's fair and what's unfair, and what's legal and illegal in the dealings between labor and management in this context. But we do not dictate to the parties the nature of their bargain.
The government, whether if you look at employer and employee and look at the National Labor Relations Act or the National Labor Relations Board, were originally not set up to represent employees or employers. They're in the middle trying to bring some balance reflectively in laws that accommodate the best interest of both sides.
Traditionally, the two sides in a labor dispute are management and workers. Both have national organizations to represent their interests. While the U.S. Chamber of Commerce represents the views of management, the AFL-CIO, the largest labor union in the country, has a vested interest in policies affecting workers.
What do working families want of their unions? They want us to be a bigger force. to fiercely champion their values and their interests. They want us to get after the corporations who force them to choose between being underpaid and unemployed.
It is time we accepted a fundamental lesson. Treating working people in a decent, fair, humane, enlightened way gives you a stronger American economy, not a weaker one.
As an advocate for the nation's business community, the number one objective of the Chamber is to attempt to try and influence the outcome of public policy at the federal level. The U.S. Chamber desperately thinks U.S. labor policies in this country need to be reformed. Today is very different than 60-some years ago. We have a multi-diverse cultural workforce with females and males. The workforce is no longer principally in a factory with somebody on an assembly line. We think public policy has failed to catch up to the marketplace today, and we think it's time that the workplace laws and the labor laws of this country be modernized.
Let us always remember that our adversaries are not in this room. They're out there. They're outside this hall. They're out there in the downsizing, union-busting boardrooms of companies that are increasingly exporting American jobs instead of American products.
Sometimes labor and management find themselves on the same side of the fence.
Organizations like the AFL-CIO and the U.S. Chamber work together hand in hand in the same coalition. National ambient air quality standards as proposed by the Environmental Protection Agency, or the scare of all scares that's coming out of the White House, global warming.
End of it here in the Congress and in the business community. There are those who argue this will make U.S. business less competitive and cost American jobs.
So in those issues, we are partners, friends, companions, and joint lobbyists. There are obviously other issues where the Chamber's membership takes a very different view than organized labor's leadership.
No contract, no work, no contract, no One of those issues involved a strike by UPS Teamster union members against the company.
Part-time America does not work. We're looking for good, decent jobs that provide these jobs in the communities and provide these jobs for America. That's what this is about.
The UPS strike is a classic example of a labor dispute that played out within the context of the framework that the statute establishes, that they engaged in bargaining. When they weren't able to reach agreement at the table, the union decided to use economic weapons. It went on strike. It was successful in putting pressure on the company. It also was successful in getting some public support for its position.
They are at a second-class position because some of them are single parents that's trying to hold down 2 jobs, and there's over 10,000 right now that's working over 35 hours a week.
Unlike the airline strike, in this case, the federal government largely stayed out of the dispute.
We did not have any direct involvement in the strike because, as far as I know, no unfair labor practices charges were filed.
But when the strike continued with no resolution in sight, the U.S. Chamber called for presidential intervention.
We wrote a letter to the President of the United States asking him to intervene and bring them back to the table. And part of the reason for that is the surface transportation delivery system that UPS has that most American businesses at that time were literally depending on to operate their businesses. So in that case, we had encouraged the administration to get involved, and the administration actually did. They had Secretary of Labor Alexis Herman intervene in the negotiations to try and bring it to closure.
There are tens of thousands of people who will be directly impacted by this strike. So the human and economic cost to the employees, to the corporation, to the Teamsters, and to American consumers is considerable. And so we're going to try one last time to see if we can get a deal here at FMCS this night.
I think the government always has to very carefully walk a bit of a tightrope there, because the government and our policymakers are all pulled and tugged in different directions. I think we as Americans need to understand, despite our frustrations with the political process, we expect an awful lot of them. Balance the budget, but don't cut my little area that I'm concerned about. Reduce the growth of entitlements, but don't touch mom's Social Security check. You know, we ask an awful lot of these people. We expect an awful lot from them, and we're the special interest, every one of us, across this country. I believe the government has an important role to try to bring some balance to the economic interest of employees, employers, and the nation as a whole. If they do that well and do it impartially, then the economic interests of the country are going to be best served.
It's terrible. It's no good.
I live on less than $4,000 a year, and I work hard for a living. Why?
I lost 8,000 last year.
How much this year?
I haven't been out.
Why?
We're not allowed to.
That's right. Not when there's fish to be caught for a sellable price.
Fishing regulation is among the country's most complex and contentious domestic policy issues. For many years, an essentially open access policy led to overharvesting that has ultimately cost the United States fishing industry $1 billion and tens of thousands of jobs. Dwindling fish populations now demand that more rigorous limits be placed on overfishing, bringing the fishing industry and environmental advocates into conflict. And like many domestic policy concerns, this one also has international ramifications.
The Pacific Salmon Treaty was originally negotiated to try to settle some disputes between the United States and Canada over these salmon stocks that straddle the border. One of the reasons for the big conflict between is that the Canadian salmon that are raised in Canadian streams go out there and they mix with salmon that come out of Alaska watersheds and also with salmon that come out of Oregon and Washington. They're all kind of mixed together, and when the Alaskan fishermen want to catch their fish that came out of their watershed, they can't avoid catching quote-unquote Canadian fish. That makes it very difficult for each country to harvest its own fish without impacting the other country's fish.
Here's an example of an issue that has proven to be almost intractable in recent years. Intractable for a number of reasons. Many parties are involved on both sides.
This was extremely controversial and very important to our fishermen in Washington State, Oregon, to Alaska fishermen, and to the Pacific Northwest Treaty Indian tribes.
On our side, the same difficulties. We have to agree not only between the national government, but also with the British Columbia government, the fishermen, the commercial fishermen, the tourists. So it's a very complex issue, and it is not a foreign policy issue. It's not. It's a domestic issue for you, and it's a domestic issue for us.
At the heart of the Pacific salmon dispute is the issue of survival, the economic survival of fishing communities, and the survival of entire fish populations.
Canada harvests approximately $100 million worth of salmon each year. Alaska overall harvests anywhere from $300 to $500 million worth. That makes it very significant for these small communities. In many of the fishing communities, there is little else to form an economic base.
The conservation problems came in when the Canadians started to aggressively fish on U.S. stocks, and unfortunately, some of those stocks are in pretty bad shape. The Snake River Chinook run is really low, so that escalated the conflict. We as a conservation organization have an interest in seeing that the conflict between the two nations doesn't cause a big conservation problem. There were basically two issues. One was how to conserve these stocks so that we don't have rampant fishing by both parties with no controls. The second one was how to preserve the equity of the fishing between the two nations so that it would be fair.
Within a country's EEZ, its exclusive economic zone, from 3 to 200 miles, whatever that country does is legal under the law of the sea. So if we wanted to, we could catch all of the Canadian salmon that swim through U.S. waters. Of course, we don't do that because we want to be good neighbors.
The equity principle of the Pacific Salmon Treaty says if the fish come out of your watersheds, if they're born in your streams in your country, even though they go way out to sea and come back through the other country's waters, they belong to you. You have the right to harvest them.
But in practice, disputes over treaty provisions have led to outright hostilities between Canadian and United States fishermen.
Americans know we ain't fooling around anymore, boys. The complacent Canadians have had enough.
The BC fishers are angry over these Alaskan boats. They're supposed to be catching pink salmon, but they've been hauling in much more lucrative sockeye salmon that are destined for Canadian water.
This was an unfortunate incident. The ferry boat going from Prince Rupert in British Columbia to Alaska is part of the American highway system. And one someday, frustrated fishermen, hundreds of them, kind of surrounded that big ferry. This was not sanctioned in any way, shape, or form by the national government, but it did happen. You're dealing with highly emotional issues, highly frustrated fishermen.
There is a social impact with every decision that you make. There's the economic one. Am I going to catch enough fish to feed my family, to sell to feed my family? But there's also the social one. If I don't catch enough fish to sell to feed my family, then the processor, who is my market, isn't going to have enough to sell. If he doesn't have enough to sell, he's going to lay off workers. They're not going to go to the dentist and the grocery store and the barber and so forth and so on. So there is a ripple effect down through the economy of each one of these small villages. And it's those kind of ramifications that have to be discussed before any decisions are taken.
We think that the only way to resolve the salmon issue is to put in the same room with some strong, good scientists on both sides, with some facilitators on both sides, put the stakeholders in one room, keep them there until they themselves will reconcile their views to come to some figures acceptable for both conservation purposes and also for the equity principle purpose.
Salmon is $3.99 a pounder. Let's go.
At some point, we're going to have to make a decision. This country will have to make a decision. Do we want salmon? And if so, how are we going to get salmon? What are we willing to pay for that privilege?
President Harry Truman is famous for the sign on his desk that said, "The buck stops here." His way of expressing accountability for the problems, issues, and demands that, by virtue of their office, presidents inherit. While the president and Congress generally set the direction of domestic policy, any number of participants can influence the policy process. Elected officials, federal agencies, the media, organized interest groups, even foreign governments. To truly serve the nation's best interests, policies must reflect current social, cultural, economic, and political realities. One of the biggest challenges for the public and for government as well is dealing with the fact that policies do and should change.